A special presentation of Dog Nation. Unmatched coverage of UGA in the postseason. Brought to you by R.S. Andrews, Kroger, Royal Caribbean, and Georgia Farm Bureau.
Hello, everyone, and welcome into a special breaking news edition of Dog Nation coverage here. Some big news just moments before the start of the national championship game that Georgia, unfortunately, is not playing in. Georgia lands a transfer quarterback out of the transfer portal. Jayden Maiava, I believe is how you pronounce that name. I'm not 100% right there. Apologies if I do not have that correct. But Jaden Maiva, a 6'5", 227-pound quarterback, started 14 games for UNLV this past season. I'm joined by Brandon Adams here, brought to you by our friends at Royal Caribbean here as well. Brandon, Kirby Smart made it clear at the early signing period that Georgia wanted to have 4 scholarship quarterbacks. I think there were a lot of us at the time that were maybe questioning how Georgia goes about doing that. I certainly don't think anyone thought that Georgia would go out and land quite a player like Maiava, especially with the news that Carson Beck is coming back next year. So what do you make of this news as Georgia lands a transfer quarterback?
Well, first of all, I think it's the biggest thing to happen in college football today. I can't think of really anything bigger than this in college football today than Georgia adding a transfer quarterback from UNLV. But, in all seriousness, I mean, once we found out that Kirby Smart obviously made it clear that Georgia did want 4 scholarship quarterbacks, I think we kind of wondered, okay, well, what level of quarterback is that? There had been some initial discussion about the idea of a Malik Murphy, who seemed like he was always destined to go be somewhere where he could start. Now he's going to Duke. That seems like probably a pretty good fit for him. Maybe, I guess, sort of a weird spot, but maybe a good fit. And so whatever the likely quarterback that Georgia could get was going to be of a level below, I think, what we perceive Malik Murphy to maybe be. And even though Maiava was a starter a year ago, I still sort of I view him below Malik Murphy a little bit, I think. But UNLV was one of the best group of 5 teams in America for most of this year. Didn't really finish that way, but for most of this year they were. And Maiava certainly had more success than not. I would say that the passing yards look really good. The touchdown-interception ratio, not necessarily, awesome necessarily. I don't necessarily know why that is. But this is clearly a capable player. And I think that Georgia just has definitely gotten better by adding Maiava to the team here. When a guy's played as much as he has and played as well as he has, and by the way, at least the possibility of several years worth, you'll tell us for sure, but I believe it's 3 years of eligibility still left. There's no doubt that Georgia's better by having Jaden Maiava on the team.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing here are tools and future production. He's not going to come in and start for Georgia next year, provided that Carson Beck is healthy. Carson Beck is going to be the starting quarterback for Georgia next season. But with Maiava, he's on the same eligibility clock as Gunnar Stockton. Those guys were both 2022 recruits. And when you look at Stockton and specifically the way that he played in that Orange Bowl, because I do think so much of this edition speaks to him in the future of this quarterback battle. I think with Maiava, the big thing, traits and tools. This guy, he's obviously a developmental player, not someone that's coming in and expecting to start right away. But 6'5", 227, sort of similar to Malik Murphy in that way of just a guy that has a lot of very nice, NFL projectable tools there. And in watching that Orange Bowl game against Florida State, where Gunnar Stockton, I think we got a chance to see him, not just with the first-team offense, but have an extended run there in that second half. Gunnar is not exactly small by any stretch of the means, but with the way that he played and the way that he looked in that game, he's about 6'2", I think around 210 pounds. He can't, in my mind, and I think maybe Kirby Smart saw this as well, he can't consistently play the way that I think you saw suit him in high school, and you called a bunch of his games for Rayburn County. He can't play that way in an SEC level and expect to make it through a season. He is not Cam Newton level built. Maiava, on the other hand, actually is Cam Newton level built, but he also doesn't play that same way. And I think this is something where if you look back to the way that Todd Monken used Stetson Bennett at Georgia, they only really used his legs in the red zone area and used that athleticism when he was absolutely necessary, when you needed to translate it into points. They don't want to use a quarterback run to move the ball up and down the field just because of the injuries that you potentially open yourself up to. Maiava, in my mind, is a similar type runner, a guy that is capable of 277 rushing yards last season, 3 touchdowns in that regard. And I think the big thing in getting him in now One, you and I have touched on this before. If Lincoln Riley wants you, like Lincoln Riley's not a perfect coach by any stretch of the means, but if he likes what he sees in you as a quarterback, I think that's a good sign for you there. But two, this is a guy that's going to be able to come in, learn the Georgia system for a year, and then potentially compete for the starting quarterback job in 2025 alongside Gunnar Stockton and Ryan Puglisi there. But you look at so many of these quarterbacks that have had success as transfers. Jaden Daniels, who won the Heisman Trophy this year. Michael Penix, who's about to play for a national championship. Joe Burrow in his time at LSU. The real jump that they made, now Penix was obviously very good last year, but the major jump that was made was in that second season at that prospective school where they had a full offseason under them. They knew the playbook. They had some experience already and really jumped to another level. Now, I think maybe Georgia's going to try and skip a step here where Maiava's not going to play this year, but he did start 14 games this past season for UNLV and hope that potentially in 2025, whether it is Maiava or it is Gunnar Stockton as that quarterback, is able to continue to provide Georgia high-level quarterback play.
Yeah, I think you just touched on something kind of interesting, which is how much will Georgia be willing to reveal about where Stockton stands in comparison to Maiava for this upcoming year? Because I think Georgia would obviously like to have both these guys moving into 2025. If it is an open competition and if there is a guy to be named backup, and perhaps you disagree with this, if you do, I'd certainly love to hear you. My prediction is that Gunnar Stockton would still be this team's backup for next year. And that doesn't mean that Maiava, can't be a really good quarterback. In fact, at times this year he was a good quarterback, but I'm still really high on Gunnar Stockton. And I'm glad that Georgia has Jaden Maiava coming in. I think that's really good to have. I mean, the one thing, and I hate to say this because it puts something negative in the universe, I mean, backup quarterbacks matter in the SEC. We see a lot of them play. Georgia, it seems like, other than the JT Daniels stuff in the 2021 season to begin the year, Georgia has sort of sidestepped a lot of quarterback injury conversation in a way that most SEC teams have not. So, like I said, I hate to put something negative out into the atmosphere, but there's a chance that we're talking about a quarterback other than Beck perhaps taking some significant snaps for Georgia next season. If that be the case, my pick for doing that would probably still be Stockton. I just am really high on him. But at the same time, that doesn't mean that Maiava couldn't have a really bright future as well. So do you agree with me that Stockton's status at Georgia is probably still above Maiava's, just in terms of if Beck were to be injured, my assumption is that Stockton would get first crack at getting the chance to be the guy that plays in that spot.
I 100% agree with that. And, look, and someone who covers this team and is around the day-to-day, and you, I think, know this from following Stockton's recruitment, obviously his time at Georgia here as well. Gunnar Stockton is an extremely well-liked player, more so than most. And I'll be interested in seeing what this move and what this sort of impact has on the team there. I don't think it's a secret at this point in time that the 2021 Georgia football team, or at least the members of that defense that won them a national title that year, just like Stetson Bennett more than they like JT Daniels. And that absolutely played a fact in the way that I think they played for him and the way that season ultimately ends up playing out there for Georgia. I think if you look at the history of transfer quarterbacks under Kirby Smart, it's not exactly great. Now, JT Daniels did go 7-0 as a starter there, but injuries obviously prevent him from being the best version of himself. Jamie Newman, we don't need to rehash there. It's an interesting move from Kirby Smart here to go out and bring in a player. They were at 3 scholarship quarterbacks this past season, and none of them had any starting experience. And so you look at it that way. But I think on the other side, look, the SEC is about to get tougher. Texas and Oklahoma are coming next year. Texas was a playoff team this year. Oklahoma, we'll see as they continue to beef up and try and get ready for that transition. But at the very least, Georgia is going to have a more difficult schedule, and winning the SEC is going to be more difficult. You're going to be playing more games, and I think you look at the NFL this season, while maybe this year in particular is a little bit of an outlier. A lot of these teams are starting multiple quarterbacks, and you touched on it a little bit earlier. Georgia's for the most part been able to avoid the injury bug at the quarterback position, but it only takes one wrong hit for a quarterback to miss 2 to 3 weeks. And when you can have multiple bites at the apple, whether that be Stockton, who I do believe right now is still going to enter spring practice as the backup quarterback, and obviously they're going to compete for that. But I would expect him to probably emerge from spring practice as the backup quarterback as well, just given the advantage that he has in terms of time in this system. I think, as Georgia enters a new age in college football, which I think tonight absolutely marks the beginning of, I think that this is another sign of Georgia sort of adapting to the times and having as many bites at the apple when it comes to talented players on this team.
No, I think that's right. And, look, this is obviously interesting because it's a quarterback position. It's also interesting because we haven't seen Georgia go out and take transfers like this, very much necessarily. Because I try to keep some light on the car. Well, we haven't seen Georgia do that a lot. If we're college football geeks, we sort of know who Maiava is. And so, that makes this kind of interesting too. But total confession here, there's also a chance, Connor, this is a completely inconsequential story as well, because if he comes here, if he can't unseat Stockton as the backup, given the fact that we think we're about to see unlimited transfers in the future, does he come in, take a shot, and then just leave if it doesn't work out for me? I mean, once again, I'm not trying to be, negative, but I think you do have to wonder okay, well, clearly he supplants, Georgia's quarterback depth for this year, but beyond that, how patient is a guy like this willing to be if he was a starter this past season for his Group of 5 team?
Yeah, I think that's the point that's important to keep in mind there. Now that there will be, it is believed, unlimited transfers. If you're a guy like Maiava, you get in a college strength and conditioning program, you get in a place like Georgia, which has run a pro-style offense and is going to continue to, I think, prepare players for that next level. And look, if it works out, it works out. You're the starting quarterback of Georgia in the 2025 season. We've seen the Bulldogs are going to be aggressive in the way that they go about trying to build this roster, whether it be through the transfer portal or the recruiting rankings. And you're going to be playing for one of the best teams in the country. If it doesn't work out and you get beat out by Gunnar Stockton once again, you do have that to fall back on of those 14 starts at UNLV, along with the fact that you also are likely to have some level of high major experience in your time at Georgia. And so, maybe this sets him up potentially well, either to start at Georgia or to be at a better spot than UNLV when he ultimately is starting again. Now, I think you've seen with quarterbacks over the years, if you're talented and good enough, they'll come find you. And I do think that one of the interesting things here is, NFL teams these days, they want guys, they want tape. They just want more reps. I think one of the interesting things you're going to see about J.J. McCarthy this offseason, who's getting ready to play a national championship game. Well, he's been a starter or a key contributor for 3 years for Michigan. He just doesn't have the passing attempts that a lot of those other quarterbacks do, and that's why his stock is a good bit lower. So I'm interested from a Maiava standpoint of what this means going forward. But before I throw it back to you, I'd just like to thank our friends here at Royal Caribbean. There's still room in our next cruise with Dog Nation coming in April. I know Brandon will be there, Jeff, Mike, Kaylee, most of the Dog Nation team. Join our fellow dog fans and Dog Nation staff as we embark on a 4-night cruise to Nassau and Coco Cay. Book now to receive exclusive Dog Nation rates. Visit royaldogs.com for more info. So, not quite the Brandon Adams read there, but BA, what is your read on this Maiava news? Especially maybe let's try and bring it back to what this means for Georgia in 2024.
So I'll give you something here. In January of 2024, he's a much better quarterback than Dylan Raiola is.
See, this is why I love being on with you. You come in with those takes. You have that there. That is something I think we needed to bring up. I think
it's true, right? It's true, right?
It's 100% true. Even if you liked what Raiola did at Buford this past fall, the fact that Maiava does have 14 games experience and does still have such a long runway in terms of what he can possibly go do, I think that this absolutely, his presence makes the Georgia team better in 2024. And, because Raiola had that 5-star nature and that 5-star background, I think there were always going to be questions. It would not have been dissimilar in my mind if Georgia's in a playoff game next year. Yes, you see Carson Beck standing there or sitting at the podium, but then everybody is over on the side talking to Dylan Raiola. I do think in that sense, having Maiava this year, and because he wasn't a 5-star recruit, 3-star kid, originally from Honolulu, Hawaii, I think I'd be interested in asking Jeff Sentell if maybe this does eventually start to open things up to Georgia landing some more of those Pacific Islander type recruits.
I thought about that. Connor, I did think about that. I definitely did.
Kirby's maybe playing 4-dimensional chess here, but I absolutely agree with you in your larger point that for 2024, Jayden Maiava absolutely helps Georgia more than Dylan Raiola does.
Yeah, so this is the first Pacific Islander that Georgia's brought in, or whatever the proper terminology is.
Yeah.
But this is the first someone like of a Pacific Island sort of Polynesian heritage that Georgia has had on the roster, right?
I believe that is correct. Jeff probably knows the more specific answer, but my belief in that is correct. Yes.
And obviously that's pretty fertile soil for recruiting. So, that's certainly worth keeping in mind here. And I think that for fans, there's probably a little bit of a difficulty of processing. Okay, exactly what does this mean? Connor, I believe that Maiava is a good quarterback prospect. I don't know that he's a great quarterback prospect, but given the slot that was available for a quarterback on the Georgia roster, I believe this was about as high up the food chain as Georgia was going to be able to go. This is, you're not going to go get, some Power 5 starter with, obvious NFL future, kind of one and done type player. For the slot that Georgia has available deep, in terms of the contributing to the depth part of this, I just don't think you were going to get much more than this. And I believe, given Georgia's need, to go out and get a guy that does have, FBS level starting experience for a former SEC head coach like Barry Odom. I feel like there's a lot of value in that. And, I don't know that this is a future starter at quarterback for Georgia, but I also don't know that it's not either.
I find it hard to believe that Georgia could have done better than a guy who started for a division champion this year in a group of 5 conference. The fact that you're able, I think, to go out and land this guy, especially a guy that USC was kicking the tires on there as well, I think that speaks to where Georgia just is as a program, but also I think what Georgia is trying to do moving forward and sort of acknowledging that, this is the game that has to be played moving forward. You have to get as many bites at the apple as you can have, while also, again, stocking your roster for future years here as well. It's interesting. Georgia has the number 1 ranked recruiting class in the country, but I think you and I probably agree that this is by far the most aggressive they've been in the transfer portal in some time. I believe this now gives them 6 guys, 5 on the offensive side of the ball. Now, some of that I think is to give Carson Beck more weapons around him. But I think when you look at I'm in my own head with his name now, Jaden Maiava, when you look at London Humphreys, when you look at Xavier McLeod, those are all guys that have at least 3 years of eligibility left. And so you're seeing, yes, Georgia loading up for a 1 year with guys like Colby Young and Michael Jackson, but also using this to sort of build out your program going forward, especially at I think, primary positions. I think you and I would probably agree here. If we're talking about the most important positions in college football right now, it's quarterback, it's wide receiver, and it's defensive line. It's not a coincidence that the guys with multiple years of eligibility that Georgia has brought in are all at those 3 positions.
I think another takeaway here is that the presence of Maiava probably also speaks a little bit to me to the need for patience when it comes to Ryan Puglisi, who is probably a really good prospect. In fact, we know people who've watched him closely, including our good friend Jeff Sintel. They'll tell you a lot of really positive things about what they've seen from Puglisi, but it's also a guy who plays high school football in Connecticut. No disrespect. He's a very young guy, of course. Georgia's a program, has kind of evolved from the days of Jacob Eason or a Jake Fromm, freshman who stepped in almost right away. We're starting quarterbacks. That's just not really what Georgia is anymore. I think we've seen a little bit more of a push in recent years for veteran quarterbacks across the sport anyway. So there is a lot of justifiable reason for optimism when it comes to Ryan Puglisi, but the presence of a veteran like Maiava, I think, would suggest that Puglisi needs a little time to grow into college life here, and that time for him is going to probably be a period of years. So could be one day an all-time great Georgia quarterback, but that's not, to me, going to happen certainly in 2024 and probably not in 2025 either.
Yeah, I think I never really saw a world where Ryan Puglisi was the starting quarterback for Georgia at the start of the 2025 season. Gunnar was going to always have the time in the system ahead of him, and just I think the fact that he was so intangibly developed already when he got to Georgia was always going to put him ahead of Puglisi. I think Ryan Puglisi, and to a similar extent, Gunnar Stockton, I believe, was on this plan as well, though obviously bringing in Maiava changes that a little bit. I think Puglisi's on the Carson Beck plan, where you're probably not playing much your first 3 years. You're probably certainly not starting for your first 3 years. But we're going to develop you. You're going to get on the field potentially, that redshirt junior year. We're going to get you 13, 14 starts, potentially 15, 16 in an expanded college football playoff. And you're going to be more physically developed. You're going to be more mentally developed. And there's not going to be, I think, as you've seen sometimes, this sort of, Bambi phase where these guys are struggling a little bit out of the gates. And then at a place like Georgia, we saw this happen with Stetson Bennett, where, he plays well in his first couple starts, has a few bad ones. And by the third or fourth, less than stellar start, the fan base turns on him and he starts struggling. And I do think at a place like Georgia, I think that's very common. And I think that's something that's going to continue to happen. It's just sort of the pressure that comes with being a quarterback at Georgia. And so giving someone like Puglisi more time to get ready, more time in the system, along with the fact that we've just seen it work. This is J.J. McCarthy's 3rd year as a contributor at Michigan, 2nd as a full-time starter. This is Michael Penix's 6th season in college football. I think we are seeing now moving forward, even, you look at Arch Manning in Texas, it's going to probably be year 3 until he gets
Yep.
on the field there for Texas. So I think you rightly point out, especially with Puglisi, as much as people around here like him, I'm a big fan of his. I think that, the Maiava news to me doesn't really impact him all that much in his future. I think Georgia still has their own plan with him in terms of what they want to see from him. I think the guy most impacted by this addition is Gunnar Stockton and sort of what this means for him.
I'll tell you the other thing that's interesting here is, I think of Carson Beck as a pretty sharp guy. I feel like I've really grown to have a ton of respect for Carson over the course of the last year, and not just because he's played well. I just think he comes across as pretty wise. It is a very interesting race between Puglisi and Stockton and now Maiava of who can learn the most from Carson, observe how he goes about his business, or just listen to him talk. I mean, Carson comes across as a pretty sharp guy to me, and it is a very interesting time for these quarterbacks to sort of sit at the feet of the learning tree here and kind of see who can absorb the most information, because that is a front row seat to see a guy who plays at a very high level. And there could be some really valuable information gleaned from that if you use your time wisely over the course of the next year. That's going to be fascinating to watch.
I think Carson Beck and Stetson Bennett are very different people. And obviously, I think their experiences obviously shaped them in that regard. But Carson Beck absolutely learned things and took things from Stetson Bennett in terms of how to handle himself, in terms of how to get ready, in terms of how to play the quarterback position at Georgia. And I think you saw that this year. So I think going forward, again, I'll be interested in seeing what Gunnar Stockton picks up, because I do think there's a difference in personality between Stockton and Beck. I'll be very interested in seeing what Ryan Puglisi is able to glean. We've heard from Beck. He learned a lot from JT Daniels in his short time here at the University of Georgia, when Beck was a freshman coming in and JT came in that same year. So I do think that moving forward, it will be very interesting to sort of see the long-term impact that Carson Beck has on this quarterback position. And I do think as well, I think, quite frankly, the success that Carson Beck had right away as Georgia's starting quarterback after not starting since, I believe, prior to the pandemic back in 2019, I think his success as a first-year starter at Georgia absolutely helps them land a guy like Maiava, who knows that, I'm probably sitting year 1 behind Carson Beck, who's probably going to be one of, if not the best quarterbacks in the country next season. But he showed that you can come in, step in right away, and play a really big role for this Georgia team. So I absolutely think Carson had some sort of impact there. Before I throw to you for some final thoughts, though, I'd like to thank our friends at Georgia Farm Bureau for helping present this program tonight. Georgia Farm Bureau provides support to all Georgia communities through important local ag programs and by offering affordable auto, home, and life insurance protection. Georgia Farm Bureau is always the home team. With agents, volunteers, and members in every community in the state, Georgia Farm Bureau is always the home team. Learn more at gfbinsurance.com. BA, throwing it to you one last time here. Your big takeaway: Georgia lands UNLV transfer quarterback Jaden Maiava, 3 years of eligibility left. What does it mean for Georgia?
Well, it just shows the tireless work of Kirby Smart and his coaching staff to do every little thing to make the team better. I don't think this is necessarily a big ad for Georgia from the standpoint of someone we even expect to play all that much in 2024, but he is certainly a candidate for playing time in a future year beyond that. And it's every stone being unturned to make sure that every roster spot is filled to its maximum potential. And it's a guy that many of us have heard of, we've seen play before, and saw have some success. So this is Georgia just going out and doing what Georgia does, which is being as aggressive as it can possibly be. And frankly, at this point in time, we wouldn't expect anything less from Kirby Smart and these dogs.
No, 100% correct there. I think you look at Texas this year, Quinn Ewers had to miss some time due to an ankle injury. Malik Murphy had to come in. Texas was able to win those games when Murphy was the quarterback, but it was not exactly the easiest time. I came very close to losing to Kansas State. I may or may not have lost money on that game. But anyway, I think that in landing Jaden Maiava, I think with what this means for Georgia moving forward is, in the event that Carson Beck does go down in 2024 for whatever reason, and again, I don't want to speak that into existence here, but you have a guy that has come in and played before. And having said that, I still think Gunnar Stockton right now is going to be ahead of him on the depth chart. But, you and I have talked about this before, how it really seems like college football is now moving towards a 1 year at a time sport. It's just more difficult to project guys, 2-3 years out in terms of when they're going to see the field. I absolutely think this Maiava move is something that is a few years down the line for Georgia, and a move that helps them more there than necessarily in 2024. But, that will wrap us up here tonight. For Brandon Adams, my name is Connor Riley. Big news: Georgia dips into the transfer portal to add another big-time player, Jaden Maiava out of UNLV. Brandon will be with you tomorrow morning on Dog Nation Daily. We're also going to have Mike Griffith, not tonight, but tomorrow night, recapping the national title game. Before I go, BA, who's winning tonight?
I'll take Michigan. I'll take Michigan in the under. Wolverines by about a touchdown, and I'll take the under as well.
I am in lockstep with you there. Too many people are rooting for the Huskies, and I think Michigan's the best team in college football that isn't Georgia this season. So I think Michigan's going to find a way to win tonight. Thanks for so much for tuning in. I'll look forward to seeing you guys along with BA tomorrow morning.